or?
Yeah, that would. I can kind of, okay, review. So good morning, everyone. Yep, I'm making my way on over.
Sure, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's amazing to be here. I'm Mary Duncan. I'm with Bloom 365. I'm a program director there. So at Bloom 365, we work to uproot abuse in a generation, and we're starting with Gen Z. So we serve youth ages 11 to 24. So we go into schools, we talk about healthy relationships. So we kind of tackle interpersonal violence from a few different prongs. And so I brought some materials that are kind of making their way around, and we'll just kind of go through them all together. So at Bloom 365, like I said, we're working to uproot abuse in a generation. And in order to do that, we need to reach 10% of Gen Z youth. So we're doing that by going into schools, and we talk about healthy relationships. We actually have what we call a 7-dose curriculum because it takes place over 7 weeks. And so we talk about consent and boundaries and red flags and green flags and all those things that make relationships wonderful, but also challenging. We talk about how to seek help if you are in a relationship, and it's not necessarily just romantic relationships, right? Friendships can certainly be toxic as well. And so we talk with the young people about that. And so one of the materials that's making its way around is our red flag checklist. So that's the longer one. That is incredibly popular actually at our tabling events. So when we're first introducing ourselves to a school or to a community, we like to go to a table event, just, before we start going into classrooms and talking about all these really heavy topics. We just kind of pop in at a fair. It can be a college fair or a resource fair or a health and wellness fair, name it, right? And we take these red flag checklists along with some other things. And it's very, very common for the young people to come up and they look at the red flag checklist and they're like, oh my gosh, this describes my best friend. He yells at me all the time. And so we start to have conversations right then and there, even at tabling events where there's lots of people around, right? So we have these red flag checklists. We take them everywhere we go. And they're part of the curriculum that we deliver in our 7-dose curriculum. So give you a minute to kind of look that over. What I'll point out is that the top section up here represents maybe some of the more common things that you might be familiar with. But the bottom 5 are behaviors that, if they're present, signal potential lethality or really significant risk for harm to the young person. So that's things like using a gun or knife or threatening to do so, choking or strangling you, being violently and constantly jealous. So at Bloom 365, we work to help people kind of identify what some of the behaviors that they're seeing maybe in their relationships. And then we also have some resources available to help. So like I said, we tackle abuse prevention from 3 prongs. So we do primary prevention, which is that curriculum that we go into schools with, just to educate young people about relationships and the dynamics and what's healthy and not healthy and all that. Through that process, we actually give out, I should have brought some with me. We give out some elephant in the room cards. So we've all heard of the elephant in the room, right? That expression. So the elephant in the room card is just kind of a 3x5 card that we use to give the young people the opportunity to ask a question that maybe they're not comfortable asking in front of the whole group. Right? So this is happening to me. How can I make it stop? Is a really common one. Or sometimes they just do artwork, right? Just a doodle, a way to keep yourself engaged and occupied. So we have some really creative and amazing artwork that young people have created. Sometimes people will make disclosures on these. I got one recently that said, call me, I'm being abused. With just their phone number. So it can be really anything that the young person wants to share that's on those cards. So when we get those, call me, I'm being abused, or this is happening to me, what can I do? Those elephant in the room cards actually go onto our, well, they used to go onto our website. Now we've updated the process. So we actually scan QR codes and the young person can get the responses that way, because we don't wanna, all right, so somebody asked this in front of the whole group, right? That would be, a bit intense. So we do the curriculum. We also have what we call our Rooted Out program. So our Rooted Out program is kind of our secondary prevention. So that is for people who are using violence or who are at risk of using violence in their relationships. So they offer counseling, case management, support groups, really for people who have identified through our curriculum that, oh my gosh, I'm doing this to my partner. I don't want to do that. How can I stop? So we offer those services, and Joshua Black is the program director over that. And it's probably our biggest program, hands down. It's like 73 people large, clients, I should say. But it's also our least funded, because we know that primary prevention is kind of important, right? We know that it's important to provide services to the victims, but when it comes to working with people who are using harm in relationships, that's just a little bit murkier, right? It's a little bit more challenging, and there's not a lot of evidence-based, which is something that funders and the grant people really pay a lot of attention to. There's not a lot of things that we can say, this works specifically with young people who are using violence in relationships. Now, our program works well, but there's not that massive amount of evidence base that funders look at. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to make some changes with that. Our third program, or the third way that we work to end violence in the generation, is with what I oversee, which is our victim services. So that's counseling, case management, advocacy, support groups for young people who have experienced violence in their relationships. And again, it can be everything from bullying to, sexual violence. It can be anything. As long as it's under that interpersonal violence umbrella, we can help. And so one of the services, or one of the brochures that I brought, is kind of our service array, or it gives a little bit of information about the services that we provide. So it's just, again, counseling, case management, advocacy, anything that we can really do to support young people who are going through it. In addition to that, we have our level line. So that's what this kind of sturdier card is for. So our level line is a resource that's available. It's staffed by an actual Bloom 365 staff member, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And it's a resource that we make available to young people who are going through it, right? Sometimes you just need somebody to talk to and listen without judgment. And so that's something that we can do. All of our staff are trained on what we call a level response. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But the level line is a place for young people to call in just to get support. So I helped one young person through a breakup, right? So it doesn't have to be interpersonal violence related. This young person, just 20 minutes prior to the phone call, had a breakup with their girlfriend and didn't know how to cope, right? Sometimes breakups just feel incredibly overwhelming. And so I was able to help the young person just thinking through, So yeah, it's gonna be hard because you're gonna share classes with this person, so you're gonna have this constant reminder that they're there, right? Just being able to provide a listening ear. So it's not always, something that requires an additional service. It can just be, I need to talk. And so we'll spend that time and we'll talk. So we're trained to listen without judgment and provide a lot of support. So our level line stands for listen, because that's the first thing that we have to do, right? We have to make sure that we're listening to the young person. And that involves a lot of suspending of judgment, right? Because in an adult brain, sometimes we kind of know like, yeah, breakups suck, but you know what? It gets easier with time. But we can't necessarily say that, because for the young person, this feels like a really big deal, and it is a really big deal to them. So we're trained to just listen, ask questions, and then empathize. That's what the E stands for, is empathize. So saying things like, thank you for sharing it with me. This must be really hard. Empathy is kind of this superpower. It's not necessarily appreciated for all that it really can do for a young person or anybody, right? We've all probably been in that situation where we've, either lost a family member, or we were dealing with something really stressful and we called somebody and we just kind of word vomit, right? Like everything just came out. And at the end, we're like, thank you so much for being here. Or we've been on the receiving end of that, and you're like, I didn't really do anything, but you did, right? You listened. My kids are constantly reminding me that I don't give answers. I just ask questions. And that's kind of what I really trained myself to do. I discovered this by accident, because I used to supervise people and they'd come into my office and they'd be like, Mary, I've got this really tough case. I don't know what to do. All right, tell me the details. Well, what about this? Did this happen? And I just start asking questions, and then they come up with the answer themselves. And then they think I help them. Thanks. Right? So listening and empathizing is really important. Then we validate, right? I think if that happened to me, I'd be really upset too. I can see why you're so upset. That's really tough. Again, a superpower that we don't necessarily appreciate for what it can do for somebody. Then we provide encouragement. You are so brave. This was hard for you to share, I bet. Thank you so much for calling. I can see that this is really going to turn things around for you, or you're really going to turn things around, or whatever, right? Encouragement. And then link to resources. So that can be an internal resource. So after everything that we've talked about, it sounds like you might really benefit from some additional support. I'm wondering if counseling is something that you've considered. After everything we've talked about, it sounds like you could use help getting a personal protection order. I'm wondering if our advocacy services would be helpful for you. What do you think about that? Right, so that link to resources can be stuff we provide, or it can be, you know what, we don't have this specific service that I think could be really helpful. So let me find some additional resources for you. So we can do all those kinds of things. So this level line, I encourage you to, share it with anybody that you think could benefit from it. It's, we've got millions of these, so if you guys want the whole stack, you can have the whole stack. We have probably more than we'll need for about a year in our office right now. So, but we give these out at all of our events. Yes.
So the person answers the phone, certified coach, therapist, who
No, so it can be, we have a helpline advocate if it's between the hours of 5 to 9, so everybody's trained in our level response. It's not therapy or anything like that. It really is just listening and linking to resources. So it can be myself, it can be one of our program managers, but it's somebody that's employed by Bloom 365. So, yeah, it can be one of 4 different people. Yeah, yeah, we've had, even though we serve 11 to 24, we've had people who are like, 50 call. And if we're not the right resource, we can help them find somebody who's, better able to meet their needs. Yeah. All right. So the last thing I want to share with you, it's on the back of our red flag checklist. I like this thing because it folds up. But you have a bigger copy of it, the blooming and wilting flower. So it kind of folds up. Yeah, software like this. But our blooming and wilting flower is the model that our CEO Donna Bartos created. And it just kind of helps to illustrate what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like and what their root causes are. So the blooming flower is what we want to see, right? It's relationships where you see respect and communication and trust and, negotiation and kindness and love and fairness, all those things that are in the center, peace. That's what we want to see, right? And that happens when relationships are built on something called agency and equity, the belief that you are in control of your own life, I am not in control of you, and that we are equal partners. So the wilting flower looks like, an unhealthy relationship. It looks like abuse. It looks like jealousy. It looks like intimidation and threats, dominance, physical violence, sexual assault even. And that is all based on the belief that I am in control. I have power. And it is important for me that I always have that power and that I always have that control. And if I don't, if there's any threat to that power and control, I'm going to use one of these strategies to reclaim it. And so we talk a lot about the root causes, and you can see where the roots are in these blooming and wilting flowers. So you can see that they're a lot of the opposite of each other. Insecurity is at the root of the wilting flower versus self-esteem, which is at the root of the blooming flower, right? So a lot of what we work to do is really build that self-esteem. That's a lot through our support groups that we do. So we're here today because February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness. How many of you already knew that? Yay, okay. Some people raised their hand. That's amazing because a lot of people don't realize that. We know like October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, right? Because everything's pink in October. October is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, right? So February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And so we are going really everywhere that we can. So I'm so excited that we were invited to be here today. Because we just need to promote awareness. Our young people are going through this, whether we want them to or not, right? And of course, we don't want them to go through this, but it's a reality. Unfortunately, it's like 25% of young people disclose to us that they either experience it or they know somebody who's experienced it. That's a high percentage. That's a lot more than we would ever. Right? So the work of Bloom 365 is really to uproot abuse in a generation. And in order to do that, we're trying to reach the young people. So we're going into schools, we're providing our resources, we're shouting it from the rooftops however we possibly can. just to get the word out that we're here. You know, there's not a lot of organizations that serve youth specifically in this line of work. And so, you know, we're kind of leading the way in terms of meeting the young person's needs. Because we really do take that view that if we're going to stop domestic violence from happening and our personal violence from happening, it's got to start with our young people. Right? They're the future, right? They're going to be leading the way. And one thing that I'm so encouraged, the more I go into the schools, the more I talk to people, is that the young people they're pretty engaged. Like they're pretty passionate about these things. And so that gives me a lot of hope that we're going to be able to really make some movement as it comes to ending teen dating violence and ultimately interpersonal violence in all of its forms. So, yeah.
I two questions. The first, you mentioned a few times about going into the schools. So when we had someone from our curriculum department that was here earlier talking about some curriculum and how it's presented actually like in the schools.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know, like, to clarify whether your organizations aren't actually going into the PV schools right now, or if you have done any of that.
You know, I don't know that we've been into the Paradise Valley School District yet. We're in a lot of the Phoenix Union. We're in some that are over in Surprise. I don't know if we've been in Paradise Valley yet. So something I'm, you know, certainly open and willing to discussing if that's something that, you know, people feel like would be advantageous, but it's a curriculum that's designed by our CEO, Donna Bartos. And it's, you know, very much aligned with like the standards and all that kind of thing. So we typically will take over like a health class or a PE class. And for 7 weeks, we just kind of go through the curriculum.
I just want to clarify, sometimes parents have questions about what's actually being done, so
Yeah.
it's possible, but as far as you know, this isn't something that's happening right now here.
No.
And then my other question for you is, what would you like us as parents to take from the presentation today to bring back to our families or our school communities or?
That's an awesome
ourselves?
question. I want you to take everything. No. I would say being willing to listen to your young person without judgment. We call it the Joan Zone. Do I have anybody in here named Joan? Okay, good. Okay. Well, it's no offense to anybody named Joan. It's just a helpful acronym. So that involves suspending judgment. You know, so we can have that tendency to like, well, I told you he was useless. I told you not to date him, right? Those kinds of things are layered with judgment. And so that's something that can really shut down a young person. I'm sure you've noticed, you know, it happens to the best of us. We try not to, but we do it once in a while, right? We also avoid giving opinion, which can be really, really hard, especially sometimes they ask you, so what do you think I should do? That's advice. What do you think I should do? That's the A in Joan. We try to avoid that because if we say things like, well, I think you should leave him. Let me ask you this. When is the most violent time in a relationship? When they leave, when the partner leaves. That's generally a time of heightened violence. So if we say, I think you should leave him, and they do, and it results in increased violence, then that hurts, you know, the relationship and you know, the ability for them to seek you out again. So as hard as it is, we try to suspend judgment, avoid giving our opinions, avoid giving advice, and we avoid nudging. That's the N in Joan. So we avoid that, like, okay, so what are you gonna do after we hang up? Right, you're gonna end this, right? That's the Joan Zone, and we try to stay away from that. So as far as things I would hope that everybody would take away is just being able to really be present suspend that judgment and really listen. And if nothing else, you have the level line card, so if at any point in time you hear of a young person going through it, call us.
So the idea is to prevent all the red flags to continue. How is a parent, like you say, as young as 11,
Yeah.
how do we talk to our young kids about them going into the dating world or even
Yeah.
relationships, whether it's a friendship or romantic, how to be in a healthy one, like what
Yeah.
age and how do you start this conversation
Yeah.
without, like,
That's
you date someone, if
something
someone
I
is this,
think.
blah, 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 versus
Yeah,
like what,
no, that's a
advice
great
do you-
question. That's a great question. So I think a lot of the groundwork starts even at a very young age. Even at a very young age, sometimes people send messages about like, gotta hug Uncle Joe, right? So Uncle Joe's visiting, I don't care if you wanna hug him or not, go hug him. You know, those kinds of things. So paying attention to things like boundaries and comfort, and if your child doesn't wanna hug somebody, like not putting that pressure to just do this thing to please the adults. So it kind of starts well before we're even talking about red flags and intimate partner relationships or red flags even in friendships. It starts with us teaching boundaries. So I would kind of start there about what are some things that you look for in a friend? Right? What are some things that you look for? Or what are some things you look for in a friend, and how do you think that might be different than what you look for if you wanted to date somebody? Right? So that's one of the things that we talk about in the very first of our 7-dose curriculum. The very first week, we talk about how the expression of things is different from one relationship to the next. Right? So if your boss touches your lower back, you're kind of like, what's going on here, right? Not acceptable. That's a boundary violation. So I would say to start with boundaries and comfort and listening to your gut. Those kinds of things, yeah. Any other questions?
Not really a question, but a comment that I really appreciate you including kind of not only dating, but friendships, and
Yeah.
especially, you know, like even fourth, fifth is when you start getting the clicks and
Yeah,
some of these behaviors start forming among friends and friend groups and that, so it's good to kind of just as a parent, I think, be aware of watching your kids' friendships and how they're interacting and
yeah,
kind of checking in, you know, with, hey, you know, I noticed this, you know.
absolutely. Things on social media, right? Like they're on social media almost all the time. And we see, you know, them monitoring likes. We see, you know, comments and stuff like that that are coming through. And sometimes the comments are wonderful and supportive. And sometimes the comments that young people post are meant to tear somebody else down and make them feel this big, right? And so it involves catching those things. Hey, I saw so-and-so had posted something and it was really upsetting for me to see. I'm wondering how it felt when you saw that, you know? Those kinds of things can go a really long way in just helping to monitor and be supportive as these things happen, even outside of romantic relationships.
so just curious, because I actually am very big on not on making my kids give hugs. They're not
Okay,
comfortable because I feel like that's,
yeah,
so I think it was my daughter, she wouldn't give her papa hugs. And he wanted a hug or he didn't feel like she was,
yeah,
and I said, I'm not forcing my kid to give anyone a hug. But I did say you have to acknowledge by a high five, handshake, or a fist bump.
okay.
Is that encouraging, like, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can set parameters around it, like a wave or something like that. Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily say like there has to be some sort of contact, but I love that you're not you know, forcing the hug situation. Like, that's really big in my family. My mother-in-law is like, oh my gosh, you've got to hug me when you come and when you leave. And I'm like, okay. I wasn't raised in the hugging family, so it's like, really? I gotta do this again? But it's okay. So yeah, as far as that goes, I think you're making an accommodation, right? So you're still wanting them to acknowledge the person without it being as invasive as a hug. So I wouldn't say that that's a bad thing.
They must make it up.
No, no. And that's something I try really hard to emphasize, like, it's not. It's the package, it's everything that we do, right? So I can step into the Jones zone with my kid and I'm like, oops, that was some judgment. They come back over here, so what did you think about that? You know, it happens. So we just gotta be, you know, forgiving of ourselves for these kinds of things. Any other questions? So, yeah, just remember, we're a resource, we're here, we serve 11 to 24. The program that I specifically oversee specializes in serving survivors of sexual violence with disabilities. So, that's a very special program that we offer as well. So if you need a resource, we probably either have it or we're aware of something else that is gonna be able to meet that need. But
Do you have any questions for you later?
yeah, let me
In case they come up with some questions that they forgot to ask or maybe
Yeah.
later.
I think I brought some business cards, let me see. I always carry them because you just never know. But, yeah, there might not be enough for everybody here, but.
Can you announce what it is and then people online?
Yeah, so you wanna just take one and pass them down? So my email address is just Mary, MARY, @ bloom365.org. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me, but hello at Bloom365 will get you to me as well as everybody in our organization. So yeah.
I think our social workers probably know about your, in our schools would know about your program or?
I don't know. I don't know. We're still trying to make our way into a lot of schools. Like there's so many schools and so few of us, so I don't know if the social worker would be familiar. We're trying to break in.
What I think, there's so many really important topics and so many issues that
Yeah.
still calendar that I already did very fast.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's like a lower commitment of way to get awareness and exposure to something like this, that is regulating stuff like that.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, absolutely. We also offer what's called a flash dose. So we can just come in and take 1 hour or 2 hours and go through one of our or two of our 7-dose curriculum. So we would just take, you know, one PE class or one health class or something. And so we can do that. And a lot of times people will want us to do that as a way to kind of test out, you know, the environment and see if it is going to be a good fit, that kind of thing. But yeah, typically what we do is dose 1 or dose 2, which is when we're talking about, you know, basically identifying abusive patterns and relationships and help seeking. So that might be something.
Yeah, before someone had asked about the people answering the phones, you know, if they were trained or certified, so it's like you're a social worker, by degree.
Yeah.
So are there other people in the organization that are like social workers or psychologists?
Yeah, pretty much everybody at our organization is a social worker. Our CEO is a master's of public administration, but everybody who works on her is trained in either psychology or social work or counseling or mostly social work now. Mostly social work. This kind of covers everything.
Now, the districts that you are in, Phoenix, do you go to like a meeting of all the counselors to tell, they're not wanting the 7 staff that they want to know about your program? Is that something you have to do so that they have the resource to go out to you guys?
Yeah, and sometimes what we do is we'll actually invite people. There's so many different things that we offer that I haven't even scratched the surface a little bit. But we also offer a trusted adult ally training. And so that's something that we might invite, like, we're in a lot of ombudsman schools, charter schools and alternative schools. So their staff, their counselors will actually come to those classes and get trained in our level responses. So that they, can kind of match what we do with the kids that come into their offices. We'll go anywhere. We really will unapologetically go anywhere that we can to kind of spread the word and just kind of get the information out about what we do. So, I don't know that we've necessarily, like, here's a bunch of counselors, and we've talked to them, but we've talked to, principals and heads of schools and counselors and, multiple people in a meeting to see if this would be a good fit. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much for being out here.
No, thank you for having me. I love, the opportunity to get out and kind of meet different people and especially the different school districts that maybe we're not quite in yet. So yeah, thank you for inviting us and very happy to be here. And yeah, feel free, any questions that you come up with, feel free to reach out. One of us will get in touch.
Are these flyers on the website?